Having a special edition of the radio show with Mark Lee on this particular day. And we do know that a lot of folks are enjoying this lovely spring weather, and all in that space is definitely like around 80 degrees here in Durham, North Carolina. But one of the things we love talking about on a regular basis is what's going on in the world. And of course, one of the things that's been going on in the world during the pandemic was a lot of folks were getting involved in podcasting and, of course, getting involved in live streaming and a number of other things as folks were locked in to home and were trying to find ways to get their product out. We even know that some of the popular shows, like some of the news outlets, as well as some of the comedy shows, were using live streaming and podcasting techniques during the heart of the pandemic. And now a lot of folks are saying that we are out of the pandemic, or at least slowly getting out of it. And that is a good thing. But I've got a gentleman that has been in the podcasting world, and I'm interested to learn how he got involved, some of his thoughts about podcasting. And of course, one of the first questions I've got to ask him, as I am here in North Carolina, and of course, a lot of people that are familiar with North Carolina know North Carolina is an agricultural state. And of course, a lot of people will know about a certain product that is in that space of technology and even sometimes agriculture, because sometimes people will be buying Hewitt Packard kind of products. So since I know that Craig Hewitt is his name, we're going to find out if he's related to that great family and or not, and also how he got involved in podcasting and all along those lines. So I'm going to bring Craig on and see whether he's related to that famous family and everything, and if not, whether he gets this question asked a lot and all in that space. So.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I do get that question a lot, and as far as I know, no, I'm not related to that wonderful family. So I have to work hard for my money instead of get it the old-fashioned way.
No doubt about that. I know that you work with Cassis, and a lot of people have been going those distant podcasting outlets, and there are a number of them that are out there. I know that when I was doing the more audio podcasting version, and I still do it with my friend Dean, we were on a Blog Talk at first, and then we moved over to Anchor, and now we're just kind of like doing episodes here and there in the podcasting space. I've been more involved with this Pod TV live stream network, which is like an actual network with various shows, but uses more of the live streaming kind of capabilities as opposed to the more traditional podcast and audio versions. But I was just wondering, how did you get involved in podcasting? If you can share a little bit about your story. I know that I got into radio when my parents decided to form a radio station when I was a preteen and all in that space, because they were frustrated by what they saw. They didn't see enough of the coverage of minority issues. They definitely didn't see enough of the music that they loved, which was jazz and blues and some of the early R&B. So they were like, with no radio experience at all, they were like, hey, let's go over to the FCC and try to get a license and get a station going and all in that space. And that was done in the mid 70s. I think the station came on in 76 and went off in like 87 or 88, but they had about a 10 to 12 year run, and it definitely even has been featured in some Wikipedia entries, and I think even a couple of short films and other things have been about that, because it was one of the few stations that is in that nonprofit public radio world that aren't connected, say, with a university or a large institution. So that was something that they did that was different than a lot of the other ones. So how did your own background come into media?
Yeah, no, I love that story, and I think that a lot of folks get into podcasting from public media and public radio. We have some folks on our team that got into it that way, and I think it's a really natural kind of evolution for a lot of folks. Mine was not that way. I got into podcasting because I wanted to quit my day job in corporate America, and so I started a podcast just about entrepreneurship and online business, where I would interview folks that were, making a difference and kind of making their own way in the world. And got into that space pretty quickly. It's a lot of fun. It's a really cool space. Listening to podcasts like Tropical MBA and Startups for the Rest of Us and Pat Flynn's Smart Passive Income. A lot of folks have heard of those. And so got into that. Started a little micro agency around podcast production. So we do like end-to-end podcast production. So you record, we do everything else: audio, video, show notes, audiograms, short clips for social. Got into that, did that for a few years, and then started Castos, which is a podcast hosting and analytics platform. So we help podcasters grow their audience and monetize their shows. And so now we have, thousands of customers and tens of thousands of podcasts, and help folks all over the world to kind of help share their voice with their
Right.
audience.
No, that makes a lot of sense. What were some of the things that you learned when you were in corporate America that you brought into the podcasting world, and what were some of the things that surprised you about the podcasting world?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the first one's easier to answer. Probably, one of the things that I took from corporate world was just kind of how business and how sales works. I have a sales background, and so just knowing how sales works, how business works, and generally how to run an effective business is really hard. It's easy to create content and have a brand and things like that, but to actually make profit and run a business and provide a valuable service to folks is a whole nother story. So I think that's a really underappreciated thing in the entrepreneurial worlds, right? Is like, hey, go work for even a small company. That's like ideal, right? Go work for a small company and see how real business works, and then go out on your own maybe, and you just have a lot more tools in your tool belt then. So I really valued that, and seeing how like processes and some systems work in a Fortune 500 company. That's probably the biggest thing I took away, and then like a disdain for all of that too, which I think fuels my ambition to keep doing this so I can keep my freedom. So those are the things I took away, and then the things that surprised me about the podcasting world is still to this day, I've been doing it for 8 years, how there's not great monetization options for podcasters. You look at written content, there's ad networks that are pretty easy. There's YouTube, there's ads built into there, and podcasting for the most part just has a poor monetization model. There's not a centralized place to do it. There's not a great kind of marketplace to get ads, unless you're maybe part of a network like you are. And I think that's probably why the medium hasn't really taken off, right? Because there's not enough money in it for most all creators to where they can make a lot of money. So folks who are like, hey, I'm a creator, I want to make a living doing this, they do podcasting because they love it, right, or they do it to supplement other things that actually make them money. And so I think that's the unfortunate reality for a lot of folks, is that podcasting is not the thing that most creators do to make money.
No, that's very much true. And one of the other things that I've been curious about, and maybe Castos, and you just mentioned something that y'all do that is maybe the answer to this, but I know in talking to a lot of podcasters and even live streamers, unless you are a major name, Joe Rogan or somebody like that, there is not a lot of analytics that goes in there. There is not really, that I am aware of, and maybe you can correct me, a Nielsen's type that allows a lot of the small podcasters to know exactly where their audience is and how to track that audience. And that's something that I've been wishing that I would see for decades now and everything, but I haven't seen quite a Nielsen or an Arbitron, which is what radio uses and everything, kind of system that could help everybody from the little smaller mom and pop's operation to the bigger ones. Like I said, if you are a Joe Rogan, you know that you've got millions of viewers, and some of the other popular hosts that are out there as well that have the backing and the notoriety, whereas a lot of other folks don't have that notoriety. And sometimes that is something that I wish we saw more of. So it sounds like part of what y'all are doing at Castos allows some people to have that, but how does that work? And is that something that you saw as a need?
Yeah, it's a huge need, and probably the answer for why more advertisers aren't involved in the space, because there's not the level of visibility and targeting that you can get with something like Google or Facebook. And I think that we do a really great job of it at Castos. We have really top-notch analytics, and I think that part of the constraint there is just the technology of an RSS feed and how podcasts are distributed, to where you just don't know who a person is. Right, the device type they're on, the browser, the operating system, the mobile app, their IP address, and kind of where they're located. We de-identify that to where it's not, personally identifiable information. But there's no concept of like who a person is, or their gender or race or age or interests or anything like that you could get from a social platform. And there never will be, right? Unless Spotify takes over the world, they know everything about everybody because they're kind of a closed ecosystem. But within open podcasting, there's never going to be anything like that. And so I think that we all kind of do the best we can, and then probably look to external sources like a Facebook or a Google or our own email list to know our audience a little better.
That makes a lot of sense. I know one of the other things that we've talked about, we also have a media show that is on Mondays and everything. And one of the things that a lot of people like, particularly about the audio podcast, is that they are less restrictive in what you can say and everything. I know that I am a person that is a fan, even though I've not been on it as much as I was, say, months ago and everything, of Clubhouse. And definitely on Clubhouse, you can hear viewpoints that you may agree with or viewpoints that are totally not agreeable, and sometimes they are on both extremes and all in that space, but you're allowed to say a lot of those things. Whereas I know with Facebook and YouTube, even in this network, we have run across problems where things have been said that they felt were counter to what their messaging needed to be, or what they felt was a fair messaging, whether that was things around COVID or whether that was things around Ukraine. And I know that we have gotten those notorious strikes, and in some cases, even some of our owners have been put in what they like to call the gulag or jail and all in that space because they've got those restrictive notices and all. But it does seem like audio podcasters are a little bit more open to open conversation. That's just my take, but I was wondering, would you say that that is the case? Because like I said, there are some major players out there, whether that's Facebook or Google, and Google, of course, I think owns YouTube. So that kind of like restricts some of what you can say and everything.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think that podcasting by its very nature, kind of like email or blogging, is open and decentralized, and which makes it really great, right? Especially in the age here of billionaires buying social media networks just for fun. Like no one is ever going to shut off my podcast, right? It's just an RSS feed, and sure, like I submit it to Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and people subscribe to it through there. But if I got kicked out of Apple Podcasts today, all of my existing listeners would still be listeners, right? Because they're subscribed to me directly through my RSS feed. And so in a way, it is like the perfect medium to distribute content in an open source kind of way, where like we are not dependent on any platform for the actual distribution, more so for the discoverability. But there's nothing to say that we couldn't instruct our audience, say, hey, here is my RSS feed. You can use a tool like our WordPress plugin, which is free and open source, and it lives on your website. So you actually own that RSS feed, as opposed to using a service like a Castos or a Buzzsprout or whatever, where like it's their platform. They could kick you off if you violate their terms of service. But yeah, I mean, at its kind of most extreme core, podcasting is entirely open. And I think that's great. I think content moderation is a really tricky game, right? There are some kind of obvious rules and best practices, and then there's a lot of subjectiveness to it. I'm glad we've not had to make that decision very many times of like what is right and wrong, because a lot of it is obvious and a lot of it is not. And so I think that part of the beauty of this country and just like media in general is the ability for folks to say what they want, as long as it doesn't hurt other people. And I think that as much as we can do to protect that is good to a point, right? And then there's certainly things that people are doing and saying these days that are bad, and they shouldn't be allowed to do that. But I think that's just a tough decision for a single person or a single platform to make, and it should be kind of left to the masses, I think, for the most part.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I know another thing that's been very popular, and you actually just kind of mentioned it, and I do have friends that are into the metaverse lane and the augmented reality lane, and you did mention decentralization, and I know that they are oftentimes big fans of decentralization, and in some cases have been trying to find platforms that are strictly decentralized. So is that something that you would say is the case with Castos, that it is one of those decentralized platforms that folks that are in that metaverse and augmented reality space have been looking for a while? Because I do know that there have been some folks that have been searching for what they consider their version of decentralization. But I was just wondering, is that something that you have been having conversations about?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of degrees to that, is what I'll say, right? There are kind of surface level decentralization. I think that using our WordPress plugin is a really good first step to that, right? Because you own your WordPress site, you own the hosting there, hypothetically. The plugin's free. You store the file somewhere, and no company or nobody is going to tell you to take that down. So yeah, I think that in podcasting, our solution is, it's free, it's open source, it's decentralized. You own all of it, all the content. The source code is available on GitHub for anybody who wants to see it. And yeah, I think that's about as decentralized as you can get within podcasting.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the other things that people have been saying about podcasting, it actually came up when Nick and Kim first started the network, was that they actually had a show around podcasting and podcasters that would come on and be interviewed from around the world. And it did seem like there were thousands, if not millions, of podcasters, and it's kind of like that notion of coaches and everything. At what point is there too much of a good thing? So I just wonder, as one that is definitely involved in this lane, is there ever times that you're sitting there going like, yeah, there's thousands of podcasts. There's a podcast about kittens. There's a podcast about crows. There's a podcast about basketball. There's a podcast about Jala, and there's a podcast about this and that. So there are various podcasts, and they're all looking for their niche audience, but maybe there is an oversaturation of podcasts. But I know that as one that is in a podcasting hosting space, you're hoping that there's more podcasts so they can get two guest hosts. But I just wanted your take on that.
Yeah, that's tough. I think that there's never too many podcasts, and I think that it's definitely, I'm biased because we're in the podcasting space, but also just it's a fantastic medium, right? It's a lot of fun. It's an interesting way to communicate and share your ideas and thoughts with folks. It is decentralized, and I think that whether you're really big on the decentralized thing or not, I think just knowing that being reliant on an Instagram or a Facebook or a YouTube or whatever has its risk, right? Those folks can decide to shut you off anytime. And so maybe even diversifying your exposure across different kind of content mediums is a healthy thing. So adding podcasting to other kinds of content you put out there is generally, I think, a good idea. But are there too many podcasts? No, I think there's too many bad podcasts. There is a very low tolerance these days in listeners' eyes or ears for bad podcasts. Poorly planned episodes, poorly executed interviews, people not doing their homework, people not marketing and promoting their shows effectively. And I think that for the most part, those shows will kind of meet the fate that they're destined for, right? Like if your show is not good, people are not going to listen. They're going to go listen to the other one anyhow, because, folks only have 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 hours a week to listen to podcasts. And if they're not going to listen to you, they're going to go listen to someone else. It's a zero-sum game for the most part.
That makes a lot of sense. It's very much a zero-sum game, and sometimes there are podcasts that have certain niche audiences. I know that one of the podcasts that we do actually covers the chess market. Now, that is a very niche market. So definitely Sasha covers a great bit around chess tournaments and a number of other things that are dealing with the chess world. But, if you're not into chess as a game, I don't know if you're going to come rushing to Sasha's show. But as he likes to point out, there are a number of chess podcasts and chess shows that are out there. So it does have a wide audience, and maybe a wider audience than people are thinking it has, and all along those lines. So maybe you just got to find what your niche is. And both he and his wife are champion chess players. So of course they'll be able to get other chess folks to come on and share that knowledge. So
interesting.
What do you think are some of the secrets to a successful podcast? You mentioned some of the things that are not good and everything. I know some people are very concerned about their imagery and some of that things. There are some folks that are very much concerned about the backdrop, and I know that even on this network there are some that have been concerned about the backdrop. As you can tell, I'm more about the content of the conversation than the backdrop and all in that space. But there are others that are very much about their microphones and their equipment, and I'm not saying it's not good to have good equipment or even to have a green screen or a number of other things, but what is your idea of what makes a good podcast?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the content has to be really excellent. And there's a lot that goes into that. That's an easy thing to say and a really hard thing to do. I think that some of the table stakes, the line above which you have to operate are, if you're doing a video podcast, it has to look decent, have a light or be in front of a window, have something reasonable looking behind you, whether it's a blank wall, maybe like you have, or something that looks interesting. I think that's just it. It doesn't have to be like the YouTubers with the purple lights and the strobe effects and all this kind of crazy stuff. You don't have to spend a ton of money. I mean, I spent $30 on the lights that I use for this setup, and then a bunch of just stuff that I get from around the house or around town or whatever. Like none of this is super complicated. I think you need a podcasting microphone because without it, you just don't sound great. And so this is a $60 microphone. This is the Samsung Q2U. And the little windscreen on the front and the boom arm all together with the lights and the webcam, I'm in for $250 maybe. And this will go as far as I need it to go. I could have an ultra successful podcast with this. And I think from there, worrying about your gear, it has severe diminishing returns, right? Because a $500 microphone makes me sound like 2% better, and $1,000 lights makes me look 2% better. And so that's not the opportunity to improve. The opportunity to improve there is how are you creating the content? So if it's an interview show like this, are you researching your guest? Have you listened to the last 5 podcasts that they've done? Have you done your research of like who they are and what they're interested in, so that you can ask the really important, interesting questions and not the stuff that you've heard that person say in 1,000 other podcast episodes. You think about, like you mentioned, Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan's been on a ton of podcasts, right? So like, it's not as interesting to hear a person like that be interviewed as what if someone interviewed him about his childhood or going to church as a kid or his family or something, whatever. I don't know what the example is, but like find either the person who your audience has never heard of, but would be super interesting to interview, or the person that they've heard all the time and talk about something that you've never heard them talk about. And those two things are really hard. And that's why they don't happen very often. But if you take the time to do those things right, you'll be rewarded with like a rabid audience who's passionate about you and your following and suggesting you to their friends, at the water cooler. Hey, I heard this podcast. You got to check this episode out, blah, blah. And that's just how viral organic growth works. And any kind of content, and podcasting is no different. You got to just create better stuff than everyone else.
Yeah, no doubt about that. You had mentioned earlier, and I did hear some of them, that you had earlier interviewed some of the great entrepreneurs of the world. What are some of the things that you learned from those entrepreneurs? I know a lot of times people are wanting to get lessons from the Elon Musk of the world and the Richard Branson of the world. And sometimes it is surprising what they have in common, but sometimes it is also surprising what they don't have in common. But I was just wondering what your take is, as you have definitely been in the lane of talking to various entrepreneurs, both in your other job before joining Castos, and now I'm sure you're doing the same thing in Castos as well. So what is some of the life lessons that you learned personally from some of these great entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think in no particular order, I think one is like being intentional and knowing what you want and working towards that consistently, because it's just so easy for all of us to get distracted and chase this shiny object over here and then chase this thing over here and this product and this marketing approach and this audience. And that's largely where most of us fail, right? Is we don't have singular focus on one thing for a long period of time. Elon Musk or whoever, Bezos, like they've done one thing very well for a very long time, and that's why they're successful. I think that's probably the biggest thing. I think that as a company gets bigger, the ability to delegate and manage a team is really, really hard and really unnatural for a lot of folks. And so the people who have made it have become very good at that, whether through trial and error or coaches or mentors or things like that. And so I think the realizing that they have a unique value and ability to contribute to their company and the market, and try to do only that and then delegate away everything else is really super important, even from a small company size on up, like just focusing on what they're really good at and not trying to be everything to everybody. And then I think like instilling that focus on your team is important too, right? Because if your team is not focused and everyone's not rowing in the same direction, as they say, you'll find that your company's output just doesn't match up to the competitors in the industry, and you get kind of run over in that respect.
One thing I've learned, just one of your take on this, one of the things I learned from business folks and business owners is that you definitely want to encourage your employers to bring their part of the vision to your greater vision. But I do think that there are some businesses, and I've definitely seen this in both the nonprofit and the for-profit world, where they are so ingrained in their vision that they don't give enough room for growth to their employees. And sometimes that doesn't allow the employers to share their vision and to bring their vision into the bigger picture. Because I know of at least one or two incidences where folks have had their vision and have not given enough growth to have the employers or the employees share their aspect of tying their vision into the greater vision. But I'm just wondering if you observed that and how you have worked around that and everything.
Yeah, I definitely have seen that, and I think that I think that's a stylistic thing a lot of times with founders or CEOs is they want the culture to be collaborative or they don't. And I don't know that one is right or wrong. I think that one is right or wrong for a particular person and a company and a situation. It's not universal across the board. So yeah, I think that certainly having a diverse group of people in your company is a very positive thing. And how those people or how vocally or how outwardly they contribute to your culture. I think there's a lot of variables there and it depends a lot. But certainly like one of the things that we value a lot is we're a relatively small team. We're 9 people. 7 of those people speak another language. And come from really different backgrounds. And I think that's one of the really positive things about our company. And I think that a lot of folks should actively look for those different perspectives because in the end, you are your customers. You should be. and if you have 9 people that are, white middle-aged males from the Midwest, you're just not able to see so much of the market. And so I think that we're able to see a lot of the opportunities and obstacles and challenges and wants and desires of our customers because we come from a lot of different backgrounds. And I think that's something we've been really intentional about, and it's really paying off.
How much do you think it is important as a conversation we've had on this network and on just conversations, whether it's been this podcast or other podcasts, is it to understand your value? Because I do know that whether it is podcasters or whether it's a number of other folks, that sometimes they don't always try to get what they are worth and everything. I've actually worked in the space of doing MCing and a number of other things. So I've got to know quite a few of my musician friends. And I do know that sometimes that whole notion of, paying for the exposure, that can work when you're young, but it doesn't always work as you get more seasoned and all in that space. And I think that even goes in the radio and the media lane. So I don't know that everybody understands their worth and goes for their worth. So I'm just wondering your take on that and how you maybe advise podcasters to actually know their worth and even go for their worth.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I think that I think when it comes to like podcast monetization, there's kind of traditional ad-based monetization. There's 2 routes you can go. One is the CPM route, where you join a network or you sign up for a service that lets you do kind of cost per impression.
Right.
And you don't get a say in that, right? It's $22 or $25 or whatever it is. And that's just, that's what you get. I think the place where you really see people who understand their value and actively go out and pursue realizing that are people who go sell advertising directly, right? So they go and they pitch people in their industry or in their town, if they have a local podcast, or in their niche or whatever it is. And they say, hey, it's $1,000 for 8 episodes. Right. And that's what it is. And it's because we're worth that. And I'm not going to tell you downloads. I'm not going to tell you website impressions. I'm going to tell you that I am worth this. And you should believe that I am. I think those are the people that do the best job of this. And admittedly, that's a very, very, very small percentage of the podcasting market. But that's the model that I think a lot of us should go after.
I'm glad you brought that up because I know some people that are in the podcasting space are thinking that they want to go after the big guns. And I don't know that the big guns, when they have advertising agencies and advertising massive money, are going to necessarily go for a smaller podcasts and all of that, and not knocking the nature of podcasts, but I do know some folks that have, gone after the Pepsis and the Monsters and a number of others that are probably, when you go to them, are looking at those numbers that you were just reflecting and aren't seeing what is going to be a win for them. I know that even a major blues festival that I was part of, we actually went to Cree, and even though there were tens of thousands of people that came to that festival, they did not see that as a big win because it was a 1 or 2 day hit and everything. So that was not going to be a major win. And actually, the one of the founders of that particular organization, which is now I think called Wolf Trap or Wolf Speed or something like that, is also a fellow Marquette graduate. I went to Marquette University, and Chuck Swoboda went there many years after I had graduated, but he was one of the founders. So I did get at least to have that conversation with him because of that connection we have and everything. But yeah, he basically, well, it wasn't him directly, but one of his folks in his office were basically like, yeah, that is good numbers for this particular event, but it's not the kind of numbers we need and everything. Like, you can get us into the Bulls game, and where we can be seen in front of, hundreds of thousands of people on an entire baseball season, then we can probably have this conversation, but not this conversation when it is a 2-day event and it is a lot of folks for those 2 days, but it's not really going to be worth our while.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think for most kind of average podcasters, say you're doing even 20,000 downloads an episode. Yeah. You just can't make really great money with conventional CPM advertising with big national or international brands. You got to go sell people in your niche. And that's a little bit harder work, but not a lot, right? Like, you go and you put your sales hat on for a while and you relay the value to those folks and you build relationships, and that's how you can make money. And you don't need huge download numbers. You're talking hundreds or thousands if you play it right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How do you personally balance? And it's a conversation I know a lot of entrepreneurs have, a lot of podcasters have it, because I know that I am oftentimes doing various podcasts, doing editing, sometimes running the podcast, also sometimes doing the interviews like we're doing here. And that being said, there's that whole work-life balance. I am fortunately or unfortunately, depending on the point of view, still in that single line, even though I'm in the early 60s and all in that space. But there are some of my friends that are podcasters that are married, sometimes have children, sometimes have multiple jobs, and they have to balance all of that in what they are doing. So how do you personally balance that work-life balance, and what advice do you give to folks about making that balance as well? Because we do know that podcasting can be a very worthwhile thing and definitely can be a fun process, but it can also be a time-consuming process.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing medium, right? It's opened so many doors for me and my business and career, for the last 8 years has been in podcasting. And so it's amazing. And I encourage everyone to explore it and see if it's for you. I think when it comes to like work-life balance, I think you got to set boundaries. That's probably the most important thing, especially if you work and do this work from home. If you can have a separate room from where you sleep and where you spend time with your family, so that you can kind of walk in here, close the door, podcast, work, produce, edit, coordinate, and then leave and close the door and turn the computer off and do other stuff. I think that's probably the best. Like, I have a pretty typical work schedule. I work from 8:30 to 5 most days. And at 5, like, I want to be done. And like, maybe I'll look at my phone in the evening, but probably not, because I know that like everything will still be there in the morning, and I can catch up on stuff then. There are times in a career or in a company where you got to put in the extra hours, and I'm fine doing that. But that's the exception more than the rule. So, if it's a 50-hour week or something like that, I know that like that just doesn't last for too long. I definitely have done a lot of those over time, but hopefully I've kind of put in my hours to where I don't have to keep doing them forever.
That makes sense. How important do you think podcasting is going to be to the new way that we are doing business? Because I know a lot of people have talked about the fact that during the pandemic, we saw a lot of hybrid work. As a matter of fact, one of my other jobs is grading test papers, and that is definitely something that we are doing from the computer instead of doing it from the office that we used to do it at, and all along those lines. So definitely we're seeing more hybrid, even hybrid events. I also work at the Cultural Arts Center, and I know that while we are glad to see an audience back, we also know that there are a number of folks that are catching the events online, whether that is a live stream version of the concert at the time of the concert, or maybe even going back and watching it after the concert as well. But it does seem like we are definitely in a more hybrid space in the world. So what is your take on that? And do you think that this is the way that things are going to go, and that could be a trend that could even give a greater boost to podcasters and live streamers?
I think with respect to the last one, I think that we are kind of over the hump of peak remote and peak podcasting benefit from remote, as a result of the pandemic. I think the reality is big companies who don't have remote built into their DNA have a really hard time thriving in it, right? Everyone could kind of stomach it for a year and a half or whatever with COVID, because you just didn't have a choice. But if you don't have the types of people and the management style and the communications and the trust and reporting built in that you have to have as a remote company, like we're an entirely remote company. We always have been, we always will be. It's the only way that I will work, right? I will never, ever commute and go into an office and have to live in a city where I have, a place to go to for work. But that is not most people. And so I think that most companies that are used to being in person should be in person, because that's just how they work. I think more new companies coming will say, hey, we can be remote, kind of like we did. We said, hey, we can be remote. We want to be remote. Let's be remote. And so that's like healthy. But to expect the kind of entrenched incumbents to convert to remote, I think is unrealistic. And so I think a lot of them, as we're seeing, will be calling folks back into the office, and that's just the norm and kind of reversion to the way things are. And I think it's best for them, and this is best for us. And so we're all kind of doing what we should. As it relates to podcasting, I actually think it's an opportunity for those companies to be able to stay engaged with their employees when they're in transit, when they're working remotely. Things like private podcasting internally for companies as a way to stay communicated when people don't want to be kind of strapped to a desk when they're working from home, maybe for a day or two, but want to stay connected with what's going on with the company. Private podcasting is a really great way to take and repurpose content, or intentionally kind of record and produce content in an audio first, like remote asynchronous way. And platforms like Castos can help them do that. But I think that in general, companies have to meet the demands of the market, which are employees. And I think that in the last few months, we've seen that that shift has swung from, arguably a year ago, employees held all of the leverage, right? It was super hard to hire anybody. Now where kind of all big companies that rely on venture capital or anything have seen, several rounds of layoffs in the last 6 or 8 months. To where I think there's probably an average kind of balance between employees and companies now when it comes to, who needs who more, I guess I'll say. And so I think that folks are more willing to say, sure, I'll go into the office and work because I really want to work for this company, or I just need a job. Whereas, a year ago, that probably wouldn't have been the case.
Yeah, that definitely would not.
And that'll change again in the future.
Yeah. What do you see as some of the big trends that folks should be paying attention to in the podcast world? You've definitely been working with Castos for a while. So what are some of the things that you are seeing in that space that are surprising you, and all along those lines?
Yeah, I think that the alternative monetization opportunities are the biggest one. Things like private podcasting, paid subscriptions. It's just huge, right? Because it takes that small creator and says, hey, you don't have to be beholden to the $22 CPM anymore. You can charge $5 a month for your audience to have access to this special podcast where it's an extra episode, or it's behind the scenes, or it's the uncut version, or whatever. And I think that's really exciting. So private podcasting and paid subscriptions, hands down for me, the biggest opportunity for monetization in podcasting. I think the other thing to watch out for is just kind of how YouTube really gets into podcasting, and how we all as content creators can leverage YouTube to grow our audience and our brand. There is a lot of crossover between audio and video and things like live streaming, like we're doing now, and podcasting. And I don't think any of us know how it'll play out, but sure enough, 2 years ago, there was almost no consideration of video aspect to podcast. And now it is the default for everybody. And so what that means long term for exposure, audience growth, and even maybe monetization of your podcast on YouTube, could be really interesting. We're very bullish on YouTube in general.
And I was wondering about that. You said you're bullish on YouTube, and I know some people are not as bullish. I know that even our own network, they sometimes are even more bullish on Vimeo than YouTube, just because it seems like YouTube, you have to have a tremendous amount of downloads and a tremendous amount of impressions in order to even get to the monetization aspect. And like I said, there are some censorship questions that they've had issues with as well. But definitely, I do know that they are more bullish on Vimeo than some of the other ones. But I was just wondering, what is it about YouTube that makes you bullish on YouTube? Because like I said, I'm open to all conversations.
Yeah, I think it's the kind of single platform aspect that is really appealing, right? As opposed to, we talk about podcasting being decentralized. You think about maybe YouTube as like a social network for media. Is kind of how I look at it, right? It's just like Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or whatever, but for video. So maybe it's most like TikTok actually. But it's owned, as you said, by the one of the biggest companies in the world, and so there's just so much visibility, so much searchability, so much data there. You can monetize directly on it. You can run ads if you're a business on it. So just the business marketplace dynamics of it are so powerful, and I think that it solves in large part a big discoverability problem that podcasting has, which is like you don't ever go and listen to an episode of a podcast. You listen to that podcast for that week. And there's no kind of crossover discoverability in your podcast player to say like, hey, you liked this episode. You probably are going to like this episode from this person you've never heard of. Like that just doesn't exist, because we all think about podcasting in terms of podcasts and not episodes. And I think that's the big difference between YouTube. Is it's just a collection of videos. It's not encouraged to like a channel, but just a single item. And I think that's why discoverability is so good, because you can say, hey, I want to learn about carving totem poles, right? And you're going to see 100 results from 100 different people probably. Right. And so you're able to just consume that content in a really different way than podcasting. It's like, oh, do you want to listen to this podcast and all of their episodes, or this podcast and all of their episodes? But it's never, hey, here's a bunch of episodes from different people in podcasting that you could check out.
How important do you think it is to cross-pollinate in podcasts? I know a number of podcasters, and you mentioned earlier that we're doing Patreon campaigns. I know that some were literally making their podcast into courses, and I do know some that are very much involved in the blogging aspect. So they might have a podcast, but they might also have a Substack newsletter or something along those lines, and it might even be excerpts from the interview, or in some cases even the entire transcript of the interview. So I was just wondering, how important do you think it is to cross-pollinate in your various media outlets if you are a podcaster?
I think if you can do it, it's nice. I don't think you have to do it. You can have a very successful podcast just on its own. If you want to connect that podcast to do other things, you gotta cross-pollinate it to email and website and social and YouTube and all those kinds of things. But that's really hard. I mean, we're a decent sized company, and we barely pull off most of those channels. And so, like, to think, man, like, I'm just starting out. I have to create a podcast. I have to create an email newsletter. I have to create a blog. I have to keep all this stuff up. I have to, engage on social. It's just, it's overwhelming. And so I think that, like, getting back to the focus point from earlier is like most people do an average or below job at all of those things instead of a really, really, really great job at one of them. I would argue doing a really great job at one of them, you would be more successful than trying to do a little bit and dabbling in all of these things.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Like I said, have to multitask. That's one thing podcasters have to do, is it multitask. So I had to check all my other people and all in that space. What is some of the greatest lessons that you wish you had learned before you got into podcasting that you didn't learn? So what is something that you wish you had learned before you got into this whole space and you regret not having learned it?
Gosh, and not that I know everything, but I'm just struggling to to come up with something that I wish I knew, but I didn't. Um, I think that something I didn't realize for a very long time is like the perceived value of things and how just price relates to that. You were talking about like us valuing ourselves. Um, I think that companies and the services and products they offer are valued or not valued just based on price a lot. You could buy a widget and it's $10 or it's $50 and it's the same widget, and your perception of that is different, literally just based on the price. And I think we've seen that, like platforms like Anchor. A lot of people say Anchor is crap because it's free and they have weird rights, to your content, and they advertise on your show and stuff like that. And then you go pay $20 a month for something like Castos, and oh, that's like premium, right? Because like you can upload whatever kind of content you want, and they don't do ads, and you own your content and all this kind of stuff. So like, I think that as a business person, like really leaning into the market and our customers' perception of value is really important, and like pricing a very good product at a reasonable price that relates that value to the audience is really important.
That makes a lot of sense and everything. One of the things that we talk about on this network and everything is the notion of understanding a lot of these things early. And definitely, there are some folks on the network that would love to see these kind of courses be creative courses and other courses taught on a regular basis. So, do you think that there is enough conversation around media and the development of media in our education system, or is it something that you would like to see a greater development of? I mean, you are part of a major company, and I know that there are newspapers and podcasts that are on the college and even the high school levels and even the elementary school levels. But do you think we're doing enough of a job of educating our people about the importance of media?
Definitely not. No, I mean, I think largely education is quite broken in the U.S. And even in other countries. We lived in France for 5 years, and education in a lot of ways was much worse there. In some ways, it was a lot better, but definitely not great and overall. And I think it's because it's so old fashioned, right? It's very difficult for educational institutions to stay hip with the time and teach the latest trends and things that are going on right now. And so it's not their fault, and nobody blames them, but it's definitely difficult for them to be teaching the right thing at the right time to the right people. But that's what they should be doing, and I think that they just are coming around to the fact that they should be doing that, and things like distance learning is a big step in the right direction. And I think that those of us with young kids are kind of right on the precipice of this changing really dramatically. Like my kids in elementary and middle school are doing things that I never did in elementary and middle school, like really, really, really different kinds of educational content and programs and stuff. And I think that fast forward another generation, their kids will be doing things really different, because just like you're saying, educational institutions are realizing that they're missing out. And in a lot of ways, it's easier for people to not go to college, but to go to like programming school or a podcasting school or figure out how to make a YouTube channel. And you can make hundreds of thousands of dollars doing all those things and never going to college. I don't think that's the right thing to do, because the world still expects people to go to college. I don't think that's right necessarily. I don't think it's wrong to go to college, but I don't think it's right for everybody anymore. But in another 20 years, I think it'll be even more accepted to specialize in what you want to do right off the bat. Go to high school, go learn a trade, learn a skill, and it's not being a plumber, an electrician, or a truck driver. It can be, hey, I'm going to be a web developer, and learn how to be a web developer and do that. And you don't need to go to college for it. I mean, I learned C++ in college, and I literally have never used it. And so, like, what's the point of learning these things that these educational institutions are teaching? The idea there's a lot more to going to college than than just these classes, but I think that as far as the core of education goes, a lot of them are missing the boat.
I definitely agree with you that a lot of them are missing the boat and all in that space. Are you thinking that your own kids are going to go into the media field, maybe even become podcasters themselves? Maybe they even podcasters. So
My son definitely wants to work for Castos. So I tell him like, hey, if you're good, we'll hire you, but you got to be good. I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to encourage them to follow this or not. I want them to do what they want to do.
follow because his dad's in there. You don't want just to come there because his dad is the one of the
Exactly.
folks
Yeah.
that are involved in that space and everything.
Yeah.
Definitely, I can relate to you on that because, like I said, my parents are started that radio station. And I went into the media field, but I know others that did not follow in their parents' footsteps, and all along those lines, I can definitely relate to what you were saying in that sense and everything. I'm glad that you mentioned that part about college and the importance of college, or not the importance, because I do think a number of folks are going into these fields. You can definitely learn coding without going to college and everything along those lines. So, um, to those that are thinking about going into the technology fields or even coming to work for Castos, what is it? One of the things that folks are being looked at. So if you're looking at somebody to be a employer, an employee at Castos, what are some of the qualifications and some of the things that y'all are looking for in terms of either education or in terms of traits and personality?
Yeah, I think in terms of experience, like we don't look at education at all. Like I've never asked for a resume from a single person, and I wouldn't look at it even if they send it to me because it doesn't tell anything, right? What tells is what have you done already, and it doesn't have to be within media or technology or coding or customer support or whatever. But what have you done, and what does that say about you? And then can you communicate effectively, especially as a remote team? That's really all that matters. Like, do you give a crap, right? Are you a hard worker? That's subjective. Can you communicate well? And that's pretty easy to evaluate, because we communicate through our interview process in several different modalities. And so we're able to communicate via text and email, via a call like a Zoom, and then like a video call like this. Um, and then like, what have you done? And that can be like contributing to open source projects or having a portfolio on Dribble if you're a designer, or I worked at this bank over here before and I can go talk to your boss over there and see kind of how you did. But I mean, a resume and the college you went to and graduating with honors or not or whatever, like absolutely doesn't matter to us.
Well, that's attitude that a lot of people will be surprised by, and definitely one that is not the typical corporation and all in that space. So it sounds like Castos is not going down that typical corporate lane, and that y'all are trying a little bit
And I think
different
it's
in that.
because corporations are trying to absolve themselves of decision making by putting the onus of decision making and the data on really pretty random data points like what college did you go to, right? Going to Harvard or Vanderbilt or MIT or whatever does not make you a better employee than going to Marquette or the University of Michigan or a community college down the street, right? It just means that you might have had more opportunity because you come from a better family and had more money growing up. It could be that you're a better test taker and scored higher in your SATs, which does not mean that you're a better developer or marketer or customer support agent. And so I think that they are trying to be lazy and say just because someone went to a good school means they're a good person, and that is 100% false.
One of the things we talk about on the network, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, is, and I'm sure you've dealt with this even as a person that has been in that county space and everything, is the inner critic and the outer critic. And I know that we sometimes be our worst enemies. I know that there are jobs that I have done before that I have not put full force in or full effort in because I was already defeating myself before even the job came around and all in that space. And we do know a lot of times people will listen to those friends and family, and sometimes the friends and family don't have our best interests at heart. So, how have you
Yeah.
dealt with the inner critic as well as those outer critics? I know we've all faced it, and I'm sure you faced it, Greg, even with when you were part of Cathos at the development of this lovely company. I'm sure some folks were going like, Blog Talk already exists, Anchor already exists, Lipton already exists. Why are you jumping in the middle of this? It's a full market, and I'm sure you heard that from both friends and family and others as well.
Yeah. Interestingly, we got into the market because we thought there was a huge opportunity, and I still do. Right, the participants you mentioned, I think largely are not great, and so like we still see a huge opportunity because of the incumbents in the podcasting industry. We're more nimble, we're better at creating products than a lot of them are, and so I think that's where we have competitive advantage. But to answer your question about the inner and outer critics. The only way I deal with it is working hard and trying to work very smart. And I know if I do those two things, it's all I can do. And so I don't have a lot of regret or anxiety if I've worked as smart as I can and gotten input from a lot of smart folks and advisors, and then put in the hours and put in the hours doing the right things. And days when I do that, I feel great. And days when I don't do that, I feel really bad because I say, what the heck did I do? What did I accomplish today? How did I progress, my business and our business for our employees and our customers? If I can't answer that really well, then it's been a bad day. But most days I can answer that with, oh, I did this and this and this and this, and these are long lasting changes that positively impact the company.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that context, because a lot of people don't have that kind of context. It sounds like you have a very positive work ethic, and all along those lines. What is something that somebody would be surprised about if they were you, Greg, on the street for the first time, maybe a hobby or something that people don't know that you are involved in? For all I know, you might be part of a heavy metal band and all in that space. But what is something that folks
That
would
would be
be
awesome.
surprised?
That would be awesome. I'm not part of a heavy metal band, but that would be pretty cool. My son would be really impressed. Um, Gosh, I don't. I guess something that it may be common amongst podcasters is like I'm actually an introvert, and I think that's something that's surprising. Is I really like talking like this, and I like going to conferences and chatting with folks for a short period of time, and then I'm ready to come home and work at home and be with my family and be with a small group of people. But I don't. I think the definition of introvert versus extrovert is an extrovert gets their energy from other people, and an introvert gets their energy from themselves. And I'm definitely an introvert. So as outgoing and animated as I am or can be in small bits like this, I definitely I don't do it all the time because it's draining. And I think maybe a lot of podcasters are like that.
Think there are a lot of podcasters that are introverts, extroverts, who I will definitely enjoy my hermit lifestyle. Sometimes a little bit too hermit because sometimes things can get a little bit too messy in a single household and all of that space. But I also
Yeah.
enjoy going out and about and being in the public light and all of that space. So yeah, I definitely go between being an introvert and an extrovert and going between both of them. So I can definitely relate to what you're saying in that sense and everything. I think a lot of folks can relate to that in the podcasting world. What are some of
Yeah.
your favorite podcasts? And we're going to wrap up very shortly and everything. But what are some of the favorite podcasts that you enjoy watching and listening to?
Yeah, most of my favorite podcasts are kind of in the tech and startup and entrepreneur space. So ones like Startups for the Rest of Us, one called Bootstrap Web, one called My First Million, and there's a marketing show called Marketing Against the Grain. That's part of the HubSpot network. They're great. They're entertaining, informative, a little bit inspirational. Yeah, so that's kind of that's my big one. And then I listen to a lot of audiobooks too. So my podcasting time is mostly at the gym. And so it's only a few hours a week. So I don't get a ton of time to listen to podcasts. Back in my corporate world, I listened to so much podcasts because I was in field-based sales. So I was driving around everywhere and I got a ton of time to listen to podcasts, hours and hours a day. But these days I only have a few hours a week.
There's some great podcasts and definitely some ones that folks should be checking out and all along those lines and everything. How important do you think it is for podcasts to be informational and entertainment, or should they be a combination of both? Because you did mention that some of them that you like are informational and some are very much not informational. So how important is that for you have a mix of both the informational
I think it
and the
depends. Yeah, I think it depends on the audience, right? I think that the shows I like are both educational and inspirational or informational. Um, I
so
think,
they mix both of them.
yeah, I think it's important for me, right? And that the subject matter that I like listening to podcasts about. But 100%, I mean, if you're making a true crime podcast, it should just be entertainment.
Okay.
And so I think knowing, your space and knowing your audience and the things they're looking for is the key.
Now that makes a lot of sense, and a lot of people don't know those keys and everything along those lines. Do you think that Castos will ever get to the point of reaching its saturation point and everything? So I know that there are some networks and some people that have a designated amount of people that they want. I remember talking to a young lady that had a podcasting type network, much smaller than Castos, and I think she was trying to limit herself, and she was in that minority space to, let's say, 10 or 15 shows. And I know that Castos has much more than that, but is there a space where you feel that it is going to be too much to manage, or you have to expand and everything?
No.
So you'll be able to handle the tens of thousands and millions of podcasts that are coming out there according to the way that they planned is being done, and all in that space.
Yep. The sky's the limit for us. Yeah.
Well, I love to hear the sky is the limit. What is something about Castos that is the reason that folks that are listening should go to Castos versus some of the other ones that I have mentioned in the past? So like I said, there are a number of these platforms out there, and some folks will be like, overwhelmed by them. I know that there's been whole conversations. As a matter of fact, I know that I had that whole conversation when we made the move from Blog Talk to Anchor, and who knows what we'll do next. Maybe we'll come to Castos, that being the straight talk with Dean and Mark and everything, because that has been the whole conversation where we move from one to the other, and we might decide to move again. But what is a reason that somebody should move to Castos is they have been on some of these other platforms?
Yeah, I think the two things are if you have a WordPress site and you want to integrate your podcast into your WordPress site, our seriously simple podcasting plugin is hands down the best way to go. So if you're using WordPress for your podcast website, you want to integrate your podcast directly there, check us out. We'd love to help you. And I think the other one is repurposing your content. So we talked a lot about YouTube. We have ways to get audio podcasts onto YouTube automatically. We have automated transcriptions. We have audiograms. We're going to have some technology around AI coming in the future with show notes. And so I think that one of the huge benefits of podcasting as a content creator is we can talk once and then get dozens of pieces of content out of this, right? And so our job, I believe, is to automate as much of that and be involved in that workflow as much as possible. And we do a lot of it, and we'll continue to do more of it in the future.
How much is Castos getting involved in the whole Bard, Chat GPT, and the other conversations? Because I know a lot of people have been paying attention to AI integrations into different shows and all along those lines. As a matter of fact, I know people that have written entire songs and even entire essays off of some of that platform. And we do know that some people, even in the podcast space, are using it as well. So how much are you seeing that at Castos, and is that something that y'all are exploring?
Yep, 100%. Yeah, I mean, it's transformational to just how we all work and live, I think. It's probably overhyped right now, but it's also probably the real deal. And so we're very aware of it. We're definitely working on products and features in the generative AI world. And I think that anybody that's not or not aware of it or not planning on using it is going to get left behind.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. How important has LinkedIn? Because I know that even here on this particular network, Pod TV, we're very bullish on LinkedIn and definitely use LinkedIn quite a bit to get our content out. But how important has that been in the Castos model, or is that something that y'all have not been looking at? And have you been looking at any of the other spaces in the live stream world? Like us know that we are on Roku, and a lot of folks have been very much excited about the fact that they can see our content on Roku and everything along those lines. So how much have you been looking into the live streaming spaces as well, in addition to some of the other ones that I mentioned?
Yeah, so I think kind of going back to what we were saying about like what makes a successful podcaster is focusing on doing one thing and doing it really well. And we've tried to stay true to that from a business perspective too. We have some activity on all the social networks, but it is not something that we do a ton of. It is something that we may be expanding out to soon, but today is just not our cup of tea.
Yeah, and it sounds like you definitely have to stay in your cup of tea and all along those lines. One of the niche markets that I've been seeing a lot of, and of course we just got out of the NCAA tournaments of great games, well, at least one great game. I'm not sure that Connecticut game was all that great because it was pretty much over before it began, even though San Diego State did try to put up a little bit of a fight, but they sound like Connecticut rolled over everybody. But sports podcasting has definitely been very popular. And I was just wondering how much of the podcasts that you are seeing are in that lane. Because when I think of podcasts, the three that come to my mind that are very much the big ones are, of course, what you just mentioned, which is business and technology, news-oriented podcasts, and definitely sports podcasts. But I'm just wondering
Yeah.
some of the sports podcasts that you have seen on Castos that have really piqued your own interest, for lack of a better word, and everything in that space. Because I do know that a lot of people are getting ready to pay attention to the Masters. I'm not that big of a golfer, even though my late uncle was a big golfing person and actually taught Michael Jordan some of the game that he knows and all in that space. But I do know that it is coming up this weekend. I know the NCAA was this past weekend. And of course, we're going to get into the race for the World Series as well as the race for the NBA championships, which will come before the race for the World Series.
Yeah. I can't tell you what the breakdown of sports podcasts versus other genres on our platform is, but I agree it's probably one of the biggest genres podcasting wide. So business, entrepreneurship, money, things like that, big one. Self-help probably the next biggest one, and then sports probably just after that, and then churches is another one that's really big.
Yeah, no, churches are very big. And I know a lot of podcasters and a lot of churches will have their services as almost individual podcasts in that way. So that is definitely something that a lot of people are using as a way to get their religious message out and all in that space. So there's no doubt about that. Even you,
absolutely.
Greg, how important has faith and spirituality been in your own walk and your own success? Because that is something else that we oftentimes talk about on even this network. So maybe not necessarily, I don't know, Christian or not, doesn't really matter, but I'm talking about your spiritual walk. How important has that connection to a higher power been in your own journey?
Not really at all. Yeah.
Well, that's fair enough. I consider myself more spiritual than religious because I can definitely relate to what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm not a big churchgoer, but I do try to have a connection to the wider world, whether that some people would call it Mother Nature, some people can call it a higher power, whatever folks want to call it in those lanes. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you have as
thank you
well.
very much.
And I was wondering if there is something that we did not get to that you would like to share with folks. There is a question that I ask everybody at the end. And of course, one of them you'll love because it's about how folks can get in touch with you and all in that space. But what is something that we did not cover that you would have wished to have covered? And I'm opening the floor to you to share whatever thoughts might be on your mind on this particular Wednesday afternoon.
No, I mean, this is your show. So I'm just glad to be able to come on and hopefully add some value and educate and entertain the folks that are listening or watching. So I don't have anything else to add. Thank you very much for having me. It's been really fun.
No problem at all. Glad you enjoyed yourself and everything. One thing that I was going to ask you as we head out the door and all of that is the network itself, Pod TV, is heard throughout various countries throughout the world. They put an estimated somewhere like 175 to 200, and they deliberately go and try to send material to those various countries. So I can say that is actually a true statement. So that being said, one of the things that I try to do is give a message of positivity and hope, whatever that message may be, to our global audience. So if you can tell folks how they can reach you, how they can get in touch with Castos, how they can maybe even join the Castos network, and some of the things that are in that space for you, and any message of positivity and hope that you would like to leave our global audience.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so folks who want to get in touch with you, we're just castos.com, castos.com. And I would just say that, folks, follow your passion and your heart, and I think that you'll be happy, right? It means different things to everybody, but for you, it'll be the right thing.
You definitely have to follow that passion. Like I said, I got into radio when I was a teenager, and one of the stories that I like to tell, and I think you'll get a kick out of this, that you did not have that same background and all in that space, is that when I was at Marquette, my parents, and particularly my mom, would come and pick me up from the airport, a much smaller airport than it is right now, but RDU is still in existence here in North Carolina. But about halfway through the trip, she would ask me, what are you doing now that you're back home? And of course, we didn't have the popularity of the laptop, the popularity of a lot of the other devices that are out there now. Of course, you did have the cell phone, and you did have a earlier version of it, and you did have, of course, the pager and other ways, and of course standard phones that you could get in touch with people there in the early 80s. But it's not like I had reached out to a number of them, so I didn't really have any plans. So Mom would be like, well, since you don't have any plans, I have a plan for you. I'm going to drop you off at the station. Since I started the station at 6 in the morning and was going to be there till midnight, how about I drop you off at the station at 6 so that you can do Featuring, which was our show that featured a artist of one sort or another. And I'll see you when you get home at about 11 or 12 o'clock. So like I said, it was that whole dropping it off and giving her a break and giving Dad a break as well. So that was a typical thing that went on in my life and all in that space.
That's great.
Any of your
hey,
folks,
Mark, I'm sorry. I do have to
no,
go
I
about
just had
15 minutes over time.
And I appreciate it.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks a lot. And I definitely look forward to having you back on in the near future. But I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation and everything. So I'm going to wrap up. We're going to hit one of these spots and everything that I have, because we do have to pay the bill collector. So I do have a couple of.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
No, glad to have you, Greg.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Are you looking for money-saving strategies for your business and personal finances? Are you tired of working hard every day with little or nothing to show for it? Contact Prosperity Financial Services, LLC right now for your free financial consultation. Call now to reserve yours today, 804-349-8600, 804-349-8600.
It's time for Bible or Babble.
Greetings to all you beautiful people. Bible or Babble, in association with Rejoice America Radio and Positive TV, presents the Bible or Babble at Sea Concert Cruise to Coco Cay and Nassau, Bahamas on the glorious Royal Caribbean, Independence of the Sea. There will be fun, praise, and a live taping of the Bible or Babble game show with a $1,000 grand prize going to the winning ministry. Join us along with ministry leaders and artists from all around the globe as they minister on board. Also featuring music from international recording artist Wayne Stoddard. Join us April 10th through the 14th, 2023 for a life-changing experience. Register today by calling 919-367-6237. That's 919-367-6237. Or email us at info@bibleorbabble.com. Come and sail with us for the 2023 Bible or Babble at the Sea Cruise. We hope to see you there.